Hey, John Thorburn here. This is Keeping the Print Quality High with Canon Image Press and PrismaSync Color Print Server. Let's get started. Hey Bob, Karen and I are delighted you could make it today. Thanks for coming and letting us do this. We hope that everybody over on your side is doing well, our friends at UBS, and all of your partners and your customers. So thanks for being here.
Hey Bob, nice to see you.
Hey Karen, good seeing you. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm looking forward to this podcast.
Can you tell us all a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I started my career in 1983. I witnessed the birth of the first digital printer copier back then. It was a CLC, 1987. I've seen many ways the industry is trying to achieve consistent, repeatable color, because that's always the target, right? And how do we know if we're printing it right? So there's been many ways the industry has tried to achieve this via hardware, software. And with our PrismaSync controller, we want to show you how really cool ways this achieves that. And I'm just excited to have everybody here and look forward to learning something from Johnny.
That's great, Bobby Mo. We appreciate that too. So how about we do this? Maybe I could share my desktop with you guys and everybody in the audience, and I can connect to one of the printers in New York and we can do a few things. Would that be okay?
Great.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Okay, let me see if I can get that going on right about now. So hey, Bobby Mo, here we are at the PrismaSync settings editor. So why don't you kick us off again and tell us a little bit about the things that your customers are concerned with their digital printing system.
Well, as you know, John, there are a lot of challenges when producing. You have different media types, you have different resources, substrates, and the question a lot of times I'm asked is, they ask, do I have to calibrate every single paper? And they really wanted to know a way to manage their paper more efficiently. Can you show me how PrismaSync manages media?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. What you're looking at right here is the media catalog, and you see that it has about 10 or 15 entries in it, and they might not be recognizable to you all. So you can personalize it. This is one of the things we do when we set up a system. And then if I click over here to something called media families, you'll see that there are media families which are collections of different media. And so the idea in the system is you can have a lot of individual papers. This list could get very high. You know, maybe you have 50 or 100 papers. Like you were saying, you don't want to calibrate and profile all of them. So this idea of a media family is a way that you can take and collect them together so that you just calibrate and profile the media families. So papers that are similar enough, you put them together into a family, and that adds productivity. So usually when I go to customer environments, people that have been using the system, this is what you typically see, that this list is very long as the number of papers that they print with. This list is very short, just a few families. And it's this short list that determines how many calibrations you do. So that's, a good way to do a system right from the get-go. Now the next thing is, it arrives with these papers that maybe you don't use. So what can you do about that? Well, you can take all of them, for example, and then you can just, select them all. And then there's perhaps a couple that you want to keep, and the rest you can say, delete them. And when you do this, you see that the catalog gets as short as you need it to be, and then you can grow it from there. So if you have a new paper that you want to put into the system, for example, you might come over here to the upper left-hand corner and say, I want to make an addition, so I want to add one. And this paper might be hammer mill, for example. So you type in hammer mill, if you like that as a naming convention, and then for the size, you pick whatever size the stock is. So maybe this is 1117. And this is called the basis weight. And this is right on the label of the paper, which is something I'd like to actually have us take a quick look at. So I'd like to go right over here and just show you this photograph. Lots of folks don't have experience with looking at this, so I wanted everybody to be able to see that when you're declaring paper in the system, the information that you want to have at hand is always right there on the label of the stock. 99 of 100 times, everything that you need to know is on the stock. And when it comes to the basis weight, you can see it says 28 pound, and then if you look carefully, it says grams per meter squared. So those are different units of measure. And when you put your stock into the system, you can use any unit of measure that's, comfortable for you. So I'm comfortable with grams, so I put in 105 grams, which is 28 pound. Then it asks you about the surface type, and plain paper is what's called normal. And you see, as soon as you talk about the surface type, it gives you a list of those media families. So right from the beginning, you get to assign any individual stock to the family that best describes it. So this would be an uncoated stock, and that's where I put it. And you can make other little additions, if you want. There are fields here that you can just type in notes to yourself or any naming convention that you like. And then when you say OK, it shows up in your list. So this is a way of growing your paper list. And here again, you always assign them to families because the management of a family is easier to do. Was that a clear description, Bob?
Thanks, John. Actually, that was pretty easy to understand and actually kind of cool. How about this? I know it's generally not wise to simply plug in, power up a press, and start writing, printing critical color jobs. Can we look at how Prisma Sync gets Impress ready to print critical color jobs?
Absolutely. That's a great one. For talking about this, Bobby Moe, when we talk about this, it's convenient if we can stand at the press and show the procedures live. But the way it is today, with these tough times, we're all at a distance from each other. So probably the best way to cover that question is to show people from a video that I pre-recorded how to do the calibration on the Prisma Sync. And the Prisma Sync has something very unique about it. It has a type of printing press calibration built in that's called G7 calibration. And that has lots of benefits connected to it. So why don't I jump over to a video and we'll take a look at that. So just 1 second.
Sounds good.
So hey guys, I'm over at YouTube, and if you and the folks who are watching today's session are interested, you can go to the section of YouTube called Canon USA, which is the Canon USA channel on YouTube, and you can type in a search phrase, keep the print quality high, and you'll get to these videos. And this particular one shows the procedure for running the press doing G7 calibration. So let's take a few minutes of that and look at it, and then we'll go on to another section. So here we go. Part 2, G7 calibration and color profiling, the color matching story. Let's begin G7 media family calibration. Choose the G7 uncoated family and the G7 uncoated media. Turn off the ILS and use halftone normal as basis for fewer sheets to measure. The inline spectrophotometer is available on some, but not all models of ImagePress, so for this video, we'll choose to turn the ILS option off to show the method available to all models, which is measuring using the X-Rite i1 Pro 2 instrument. The system prepares the calibration charts, warms up the printer, and prints the charts. Plug in the i1 Pro 2 and initialize it for hand measurement. 6 sheets have to be measured. You can see from the screen display that it's 4 rows per sheet. The color patches being measured are a combination of calibration and color profiling patches. Page 4 are the standard calibration patches. Throughout the other pages are target patches for gray balance and color profiling for custom media output profiles. Measurements are done. Feedback information about the process appears. Measurement accuracy tells us about the trustworthiness of the measurement process. Output profile information tells us about the calibration date and time. Gamut displays a 3D rendering of the color gamut that was created. Neutral color separation displays the CMYK separation logic. And G7 grayscale calibration displays special feedback on the accuracy of the mathematics toward achieving the G7 target. That is not, however, G7 verification. Our next step is to perform G7 verification on our paper. Turn off the inline spectro, warm up the printer, and print the verification pages. These two sheets will look more familiar to folks who know about the P2P target in the G7 process. These are the P2P gray patches, duplicated in multiple positions for data averaging, spanning 2 sheets of 4 rows per sheet. The green check mark means we passed G7 grayscale verification. Now we can see the target curves and the delta difference metrics down below. Measurement accuracy is trustworthy. We can move on ahead to color space validation. We choose our media, the Validate menu, search for the validation we want, which is Grackle 2013 SCCA. Measure by hand, not with the ILS. SCCA is substrate-corrected colorimetric aims. Initialize the i1 Pro 2 and measure the patches. This is the Idealines Control Wedge 2013. We passed with quality level A. Touch on the green checkbox and we can see the delta difference metrics. We see the allowable range, 2.5, 5.0, 5.0, 3.0, and our numbers, which were great. Now we're done with the process. Thanks for joining us. See you next time. So I hope you found that video interesting. And here we are, just so you can all see that this is the Canon USA YouTube channel. And I put a search phrase in called Keep the Print Quality High. And there's a series of informative videos there that you all can check out. And maybe these first 3 are the most interesting to folks. When it comes to calibration, which is the way to get repeatability in the system, there's a few steps that folks take, and you consult with Bobby Moe and we work out together how frequently your environment needs this done. But one of them is called bringing the press up to color, and that's calibrating the printing press directly. Then the one that we just took a look at, part 2, was called G7 calibration. That gets the system calibrated and profiled to industry printing standards. And then there's another one which we'll talk about this sort of content in a bit, live today. This is called Changing Colors Quickly and Efficiently. So these are all up there on YouTube, available to everybody.
Nice. Thanks so much for showing us those resources. I'm wondering, can you possibly show us a few ways to get jobs into the system?
That's a great idea. Let's do that. Let's start with a typical example of printing from an office application like PowerPoint.
Okay.
So let's take a look over here and see what we have. You know, I have a few sample files at the ready. So let's open one up. So of course, there are different ways of bringing data into a printing system, and the traditional one is saying file print from an application. So here we are with a typical colorful PowerPoint document. And it doesn't matter if you're printing from Macintosh or Windows, this aspect is pretty much the same either way. The printing drivers, the user interface looks a little bit different, but the same functionalities are in both places. And when you're working in PowerPoint, as I'm sure many of you know, the different objects that you put into PowerPoint, you know, can be colorized many different ways. And if you're curious, you inherit a PowerPoint document from somebody else, and you want to see what sort of color recipe has been used, like for that particular blue box, for example, you can take a look at the Format menu, and you can see what color recipes have been used. So when it comes time to print, you launch the print dialog. Like in my case, I use the keyboard shortcut to say File Print. And in terms of the time that printing takes in today's podcast, that's a reflection of the network between Boston and New York. So in your own local environment, it's speedy, quick. And this is what a printing dialog looks like. You know, this is PostScript printing, the classic way of sending data to the system. So you have choices, you know, many different choices. paper size and, whether you scale the document to fit the size of the paper or not. And there's a pull-down menu here that offers different selections. Some of these, you see how they're categorized. They have these dividing lines between them. Some of these selections refer to choices you can make from the software application that you're printing from. Others of these selections refer to options that are on the receiving side. So over there at the Prisma Ink or whatever RIP you're printing to. Like for example, there's one here called Printing Method. And when I choose Printing Method, it was in that section of Prisma Ink choices. So once they start talking to each other, and this is bidirectional communication, so these messages are going back and forth across the network, the next menu comes on screen. And in this option here called Destinations, Scheduled Jobs or Waiting Jobs, that answers the question of whether or not the print job goes across the network, gets spooled on the RIP that's driving the printing press, and then goes right to paper in a completely unattended way. Or, like what I'm choosing here now, waiting jobs, it spools across the network, and once it arrives on the other side at the Prisma Ink, it sits in a waiting state until the press operator interacts with it, reviews its parameters, and then says, yes, I want you to print now. So I'm going to print to a waiting jobs condition right now. And that's
It's basically a holding queue, right, John?
That's exactly it, Bob. It's a holding queue. And while we were having that little dialogue, I jumped across to the section of the Prisma Ink called the Remote Manager. And this is the hold queue that you were just mentioning, Bob. In this product, it's called Waiting Jobs. And so now the document is here. It's gone from Boston to New York. It's had some fundamental processing, and now it's sitting in the Prisma Ink. And once it's in the list here, you can interact with it by double-clicking on it. And the first thing that comes up is this fast, colorful preview. And that's one of the things you're going to notice is that it's really speedy quick. And that's because inside the Prisma Ink, it's what you call an Adobe PDF workflow. It uses the PDF print engine. And so it can go through data very quickly and generate a rapid, colorful screen preview. This is called the fast preview. And that's really great. And you can see down here, there's a scroll bar. If this were a 32-page document and we opened it up, you'd see that it's drawing itself page by page, fast, fast, fast. And so this helps the press operator to just pre-flight the job, make sure that they understand what's in there and whether it has any special needs, for example. So once that comes in, there's another sort of way of interacting or looking at the data, and this is called the Adjust Image window. It actually has a different, fancier name. It's called the Pixel Precise Previewer. And that phrase, pixel precise, is important. What that's talking about is the ability to zoom in all the way up to the individual points and pixels. And you see the screen redraws itself as you zoom in further and further. And when you're at this section of zooming in so closely, you also can turn the color separation channels on and off. So what we're really interacting with here in the Pixel Precise viewing window is you're interacting with the data that actually goes right to the printing press, the data after the ripping process has been done. And when you're in this window offers a lot of functionalities, not just for reviewing and analyzing, but also for making changes, for example. Let's see if we can look at a typical change. You know, this particular color is called PowerPoint Blue. Back there in PowerPoint, that's called PowerPoint Blue. It's the label that PowerPoint gives to that gradient background. Although in real life, when it prints on many printing systems, it looks more purple than people expect to see. So it's a funny thing. The name says blue, but when you print it, it looks sort of purple. So oftentimes printing systems want to make a correction to take this purpley blue and shift it across to a more traditional blue. And there are lots of ways of doing it. One way in this system is that we have these correction curves, and I'm loading one right now. It comes with the product. It's called Cool. And when you load it in and you take a look at it, you might have seen a couple of things happen sort of quickly. One thing is over here on the right, this little window appears. It's like Photoshop curve correction window. And you can see that this pinkish line, the magenta line, has actually been adjusted. And at the same time, the screen display over here on the left, the display color, you can see the shift in it from the purpley blue that it was to a more traditional blue. And in addition, there's a tool here which is a color sampling tool. And when you call the sampling tool up and move it around, wherever you put the cursor, you can see in this little mathematics window here, the input color values before you made the change and the output color values. And so when you look at the numbers, you can see that magenta was reduced. It was taken down a little bit. So these things are easy to apply and they're easy to make. Now, of course, if you make something like this, you don't want to make it over and over and over again. What you like is make it once and then apply it automatically. So in the Prisma Ink, these curve corrections, they can go everywhere. They can get applied to workflows. They can get applied to media families. They can get applied automatically in lots of different ways. So that's a theme in the product, which is figure out what you need to do it once, and then automate it. And so that's pretty cool. Now, in addition, sometimes you see that some colors in a print job, in a sense, are more important than other ones. What I mean to say is that some colors are connected to the corporate brand, for example. So let's use this blue patch over here that I'm looking at right here. Let's zoom in a little bit so you all can see it a little bit more clearly. So we zoom in and I take my color picker and I take a reading and I see what it used to be and I see what it is now after the curve correction for the background. But what if, just for example, this were some sort of corporate brand color and your client already knows what color they want that to print in when it hits the printing press? They want it to be pure 100% cyan, and you can see that it clearly is not that. And this sort of a thing happens all the time, especially in these office applications when your important brand colors, your designers are trying to get them to work from applications like PowerPoint, but PowerPoint is what they call an RGB application. So ordinarily, you'd specify an important color like this as a spot color, a Pantone color, for example. But in PowerPoint, it doesn't really deal with Pantone colors. There are little applications, plugins that you can put into PowerPoint so you can ask for a color from the PowerPoint palette, but when PowerPoint collects up its data and sends it through the printer driver, it doesn't stay a Pantone color anymore. It becomes an RGB recipe. And so precise color matching is harder than the average user really would ever expect. So what can you do with something like this to dial this in perfectly and have it not be affected by any other correction that you make on the page? Can it be done? And the answer is yes. So let me show you how something like that would work. We jump back over to the settings editor and we go to the color tab and we go to the area called spot colors. And when we go to spot colors, there are many different libraries. And we're going to ask for the custom libraries. And you can see that there's one entry that I've made ahead of time already in there. It's called My Blue. And when I highlight it and I go into the edit menu, I do a little login, the secret login, and then I come into the recipe book and you can see what I've done. I've made a color that I've called My Blue. And down here in the recipe, I've said you print 100,000. In other words, the pure cyan that your client wants to see when it prints. So you make a spot color right here in the RIP, in the Prisma Ink. Now, this same thing can also be done on, if it's not PowerPoint, but other applications. This same sort of thing can be done, generally speaking, with applications that actually let you define spot colors. So the Adobe Creative Cloud, for example, you can make custom palettes over there with any naming convention that you're comfortable using, and then you reproduce those palettes on the Prisma Ink side with the same naming convention, And once you have them in your palette list on the Prisma Sync, you can dial in exactly what recipe they receive when they print. So now we have this thing, and it's called My Blue. So the question is, how do you get it into that PowerPoint job? Well, the next thing that you do is you say, I want to map it into the PowerPoint colors. What does that exactly mean? It means making one of these things called a color mapping instruction. And when we look at this color mapping instruction, which I've made ahead of time, just to save everybody's time, you can see that over here on the Prisma Sync side, there's a recipe, 0176240. Where do you suppose that recipe comes from? It comes from right over here, from having known what the designer used in the PowerPoint document, 0176240. So in other words, the RIP is powerful enough once you tell it what colors the designer has worked with to say, when you see that in a document, switch it to the color recipe that I want to use when I print. That's called color mapping groups over here in the Prisma Sync. And so once you make a color mapping group, and here again, let's not forget this idea. The idea is you solve what's needed to be done once, and then you automate it. You use it over and over again, so you don't have to go through all that drudgery more than one time. Those color mapping groups are sitting in a library, not bothering anybody, waiting to be used until the print job that needs the color mapping group arrives in the RIP. And then that's what you're looking at now. These are the print job color settings for this PowerPoint job. So these color settings has a field. It's called color mapping groups. And you go into that field and you pick the mapping group that has that instruction that you need. And once you pick that mapping group and you apply it to the print job, then when you go back into the adjust image window, and let me spin it around for everybody's convenience, you take a reading over there, and what do you see? You see that the output color for that important blue is now exactly what you want it to be, and still it's not affected by that curve correction anymore. So the overall edit for purpley blues becoming traditional blues and the specific edit for that corporate brand color, they live together in perfect harmony in the system. So you have all these levels of control. And that was just showing one example of, how a print job comes in. But of course, you can see that I sort of extended your question to not only how do you get it into the system, but once it's in there, what do you do before you print it? You take a look, you check to see if things look good. If you see anything that needs corrections, you make a fast correction. There are tools there for it. They're easy to learn. And then you're off to the races. Once you realize that a pattern forms, and this is happening more than one time, you automate it. You go the extra mile to make these instructions, and then you turn them into a workflow. So when jobs come into the system, you assign the workflow, and all of the steps have been done for you already ahead of time. I got excited there, so you guys will have to forgive me.
Oh, it was great. Yes, that was great. Thanks.
John, I was watching that spot color, and another thing that customers don't always have, I know perhaps maybe this isn't the time to show that, but in the spot colors, there's many times you were just there, and I needed to change the spot color at the 20% or the 30% blending level. I've never been able to do that. Is the Prisma Sync able to control spot colors that aren't just a solid?
Bobby Mo, that's a great question because, like you say, that's been a problem for a long time. And the answer is yes. The Prisma Sync was the first system that I've ever seen that could handle that in a simple, easy, elegant way. So here, I can show you. I can get a job going on and we can see it. So if you guys don't mind, I'll just jump right to that since that's so cool. And it also gives me a chance to show you the other way, one of the other ways that jobs can be brought into the system. So I'm looking at my desktop and I have a file that asks for that sort of a thing, spot colors with tints, and I can simply drag and drop it into the system. And when you drag and drop, that you can do this for PDF files, TIFF files, the right file type. when you drag and drop, you get this menu, and the menu has automated workflows. So in other words, a moment ago, I went through this stepwise example of how to print a PowerPoint, evaluate it, make some corrections, and then I made the claim you can take all those corrections and you can store them up in something called a workflow. And this list right here is what I was talking about. When you do that, you can pull things, on the way into the system. So once they're in, they're essentially ready to print. You can say, off you go. Okay, so there's that. And, media lists, you can assign media on the way in. So you can see that the catalog is just the things that I had defined, earlier in our talk. So this is a nice, elegant way of bringing files into the system. Now, this particular file, which relates to your question, Bobby Mo, is we can take a look at it, and I can show you. Here, let me make this a little bit bigger and fit the screen a little bit better so you can see more clearly, in this really nice view window here. These colors that you see in this file that I'm pointing at right here with the color picker, when I check the recipe now, it's all CMYK. And that's always going to be true because if you can recall a few minutes ago, I mentioned that when you're using this display window, you're seeing the output values that the press actually needs. And this is a CMYK printing press. However, when you look at the source data, you can check to see what sort of color recipes were in there. And all of these purples were defined as Pantone Reflex Blue. And you can see that there's a solid patch and it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. And over here, it's a duotone type photographic image. And these are all defined as Reflex Blue, this spot color. So with this as an example, what we can do is we can take a look at the spot color libraries and we can get right to this question that you were asking about, which is, can you adjust tints easily, and if you need to, separately from the spot color solids? Well, here's how you do it. It's a big, long library list, and you don't want to go scrolling through all of it, so you have a search field here, name REF for Reflex Blue, and I hit the filter button. And of all the libraries that are in there, it finds anything that adheres to that search. So now I have Reflex Blue C for coded, uncoded, XGC, all the different libraries. And by the way, this calls up an interesting point, which is Pantone libraries get updated over time. And so with a system like this, when Pantone updates their libraries to new versions, you can just import them right into the Prisma Sync so that the Prisma Sync always stays up to date with what your design applications are doing. So here's the one that's used in this job. It's called Reflex Blue C. So I go in there, and the system has many levels of how can you say, login levels. So you can have operators, you can have administrators, you can set it up whatever way is appropriate for your environment so that some of these functions, which, maybe are more strategic than others, you decide who on the team, should be able to get access. So you can set all that up. So here's the recipe book for Reflex Blue. And in order to make this, in the podcast today, to make it clear, everyone can understand it, I'll ask to do some, not lifelike, but very graphically easy to see sorts of changes. So, for example, the first thing that I'll ask for is I'll change the output recipe for Reflex Blue, and I'll make it pure magenta. And also, it's worth mentioning now that when you do these, you can do these in different ways for your different paper families. So in other words, the adjustment that you make for uncoded stock for a Pantone color, you might need or want to tweak it for heavy coded stock. So you have all of that level of control as well. So I've just made the change, and now I jump back into the print queue here to see if the change is there. And you can see it without even going into the Pixel Precise preview. You can see that all of those elements that were specified in the source document as Reflex Blue, now that I've changed the solid to be pure magenta, they've all changed as well. And this is the point that I want to draw your attention to. In traditional systems, you know, there are many other RIP systems out there, you know, digital front-end controllers for presses. And you're probably familiar with many others. And all of them traditionally think this way, which is when you change the solid, all of the lighter tints travel along with the change to the solid. So that's nothing new. This is the relatively new part. Now we can go back into this instruction menu here, the one where we used to make that change, and there's a little function there called add another value. And when you add another value, the system gives you a helpful sort of reminder. It's telling you, you've already told me what to do for the solid, so if you're going in here to add another instruction, it probably needs to be for something you want to do for either a tint value or maybe for a different paper type. So it's a little helpful, you know, message saying, don't be redundant, do something new. So for example, right here where it says tint 100, I can change that number to 20. And you can see the warning message disappears because now the operator has put in an input that makes sense, which by the way is the theme with PrismaSync, is it makes it hard for people to make a mistake. It's giving you warnings, you know, here and there about what you haven't done yet, what you're about to do. It also, you know, this is a media-based system. That's a fancy way for saying it's very difficult to print a job on the wrong paper, which of course is really important because you print a job on the wrong paper and that's expensive. You have to reprint the job. So, you know, that's hard to do. So I'm just trying to mention some themes, you know, like underlying design themes here. So let's do something here again, graphically easy to see. At 20% reflex blue, I've asked it to become solid yellow, which of course isn't like real life. However, when we come over here to see the change, it is, you know, very easy to see the change. And the change maybe looks unfamiliar to the eye because, as I say, in terms of the history of these sorts of products, you know, RIPs, you haven't been able to make anything that looks like this so quickly and so easily. And if you really want to analyze it, you can say at the 20% patch, it's 100 yellow, and then the yellow stays pure toward paper white. But at the other end, since there's another instruction there at the solid, you see that they blend, which is exactly what you'd want and exactly what you need, because spot colors aren't just used in, you know, vector objects. They're used in images as well. And that's really what you want. For images, you know, that's photographic, you know, naturalism or whatever. You really need things to blend. And that's exactly what it does. So thanks for that question, Bobby Mo, because, you know, I was dying to show that one. So thanks a bunch.
That's a pretty powerful tool. I mean, that could save clients a lot of time making corrections that otherwise might be difficult, or, you know, they have to go back upstream and redo the file. So that's pretty powerful.
I agree. You know, we use it all the time, and it comes in handy. It comes in handy. How about we take a turn toward another theme, which is turning documents that were set up as single pages into different structures, like booklets, for example, or things that, you know, arrive small format, like business cards or postcards. You know, they're so small that they're too tiny for a big sheet of paper. So most people want to put them in multiple positions on the sheet, multi-up. So why don't we take a look at some of those sorts of things?
Sounds good.
Okay. So let's start off slow and let's build a theme here. So here's a document that fits that description. And you can see that it's a single page document and it's a 16-page brochure, and it wants to be a booklet. So let's bring it into the system by dragging and dropping it in. And it comes into the waiting jobs queue. And notice when it says media, you can see that use whatever was specified in the document if something was specified. And so it shows up in the system here, and it picks up the letter size stock. That's the only stock that's in the system that matches what was specified in the document. And of course, just to remind y'all that we only have 3 instructions in our paper catalog now, so everything makes sense. These are letter size pages. We want to get them on that tabloid 1117 stock, and we want to impose it so that it goes in the proper order, reader spreads to printer spreads, and that we want to staple it along the spine, the typical stuff. So we double click on the document and we look at it here in the fast preview window, and then we have all of these print options. And this technique that I'm showing now is the slow road. We're going to start with the slow road, and then we're going to show the fast road. So on the slow road, you go to the media menu and you say, well, it really needs to be on 1117. So we make the change and we see that that's reflected instantaneously in the preview. Then we say, well, we have to make a change to the layout. So over here in the layout, we want to choose this option called booklet, and we say okay. And now it starts to show up in a more recognizable structure. And now we get to see how this fast preview lets us jump around in the various spreads in the document and so forth. So you see that it draws very quickly. That's really a powerful feature of this. And now it may look like it's ready to print, but we haven't talked to the finishing yet. We haven't told it how to finish the document. So we'll come over here to some of the finishing options, and first we'll go to binding, and we'll take a look and we say saddle stitch. And as soon as we do that, all of these things light up. This is that help support that I was mentioning a minute ago. And these things that are lit up in orange, they're basically saying there are other things that I need to know before your instructions make sense. You need to talk about the folding. You need to talk about which output tray it goes to, the saddle stitcher. And once you've done that, everything is done. And you can even see, if you look carefully, or if I zoom in for you here, you can see that it will show where the staples are going and so forth. So that's the basic way to do it, and it works like a charm. However, why don't I cancel out of there, and why don't we come over here and start to look at some of the automation possibilities in the system? So one of these automation possibilities is called making an automated workflow. So we're going to make an automated workflow for booklets. So I say I want to add an automated workflow, and there's a big list of options, and when they come up, you can decide whether all these menus are collapsed or not. Like, for example, I had them all collapsed so that you don't have to read more stuff than you really need to get to. So automated workflows have all of the various options that are available in this big long list. However, in terms of your user interaction design, you decide whether you like seeing long lists or whether you don't. So you can collapse the menus or not. So here we are, and we have an automated workflow with nothing in it, and we'll give it a title, and it's called booklet. And then the various things that we did step by step a moment ago, we can just select them ahead of time. So there's the media that we want, tabloid 1117. And then here's the stapling, which is the saddle stitching. And here's the output tray, which is the booklet tray. And, we look at all the different things that we have to decide. Here's the folding, which is called multi-half fold. And that's on the inside. And up here in positioning, I skipped over it. This whole thing is about booklets. And so we set up all of those parameters ahead of time, and we okay them. And the reason why that's really helpful to do is, well, first off, here's one way to show it. The job is in the RIP, and it came in as single pages, and you want to turn it into a booklet quickly with a single click. So you highlight the job, and you go to the list of your automated workflows, and you pick booklet, and you just apply it. And it does a fast re-ripping, and when you open the job up, there it is. It's a booklet. It's a single click. In this instance, it's a booklet, but in another instance, it could be some other type of finishing requirements. Then, of course, that's one example. Here's another example, which is these automated workflows. You don't have to apply them. You don't have to bring jobs in, and then once they're in the queue at the Prisma Sync, then apply them. In fact, the higher concept is that you do this on the way in. So, for example, here's another booklet job. This one's called The Time Is Always Now. And this is a 12-pager, letter size pages. So I drag and drop this one into the system. And on the way in, there's my automated workflow. And I ask for booklet on the way into the system. And when it shows up, it's already ready to go. So then one other idea of this automation, which people ask all the time, and I'm going to illustrate by just taking the jobs that are in the system and clearing them out just for a moment. And that is to have everybody understand that you can take multiple jobs at one time and bring them into the system. So here are the 2 booklet jobs, and I can drag and drop them as a team. And it remembers the last thing that I selected, which is the automated workflow called booklet, and it's going into waiting jobs, and you can see the spooling across the network is happening. And once the spooling is done, both of them, whole collections of jobs, are already ready to go. So that's a theme that everybody should appreciate, and that is each different partner of yours, Bobby Mo, has their own way of doing things. Once the product gets in their environment, you and your team and me and my team, we all try to figure out what do they need. And then we build it in the most efficient and automated way possible. So the system has that as a concept, and that's how you use it.
It's slick, John, very slick. It looks good. It saves them a lot of time automating things, and it keeps it simple.
It keeps it simple.
Hey, John, I really liked that last piece you showed us, and it made me think about editing colors, late-stage edits. Even if commercial printers do print to a standard, that doesn't always mean that the color is going to look, the way they want it to look. It's not perfect to every eye. What do we have in there to make late-stage edits so we don't have to go back and unpeel the onion, go back upstream, because that always isn't an option. What do we have in the sync that helps us make those late-stage edits?
Okay, sure. We can take a look at that. There are bunches of things. We've looked at a couple, which was we looked at spot color editing, and we looked at color mapping groups for special corporate colors that were specified in the document, not with the recipe that they ultimately needed. We took a look at color correction curves that can be pre-done and applied automatically. That's when we shifted the purpley blue to a more traditional blue. Why don't we look at a couple of things in combination? This time, we'll go back and we'll look at those curves for a different sort of a usage. And we'll also look at issues related to patterning. Sometimes things in the artwork that are highly patterned, that when they interact with the halftone dots in a printing system, they throw some weird waviness in there. That's called moire pattern. So we can take a look at that, and we can take a look at a situation where, let's say, in general, in terms of color balance, the color balance of the document the way it was designed versus the color balance of your printing press, which is, now you print it to a standard. So your printing press is repeatable, it's hitting the standards, but what folks don't often realize, when you first get into this game, is that lots of the suppliers of designs, they pick up parts and pieces of images and objects that have been kicking around in a database or in old print runs for years and years ago that were set up for different print conditions. They pick them up and they reuse them. So this is actually a big theme that commercial printers understand well, but on the design side, I'm not sure that everybody understands. When you're picking up and reusing artwork, it might have been prepared for a different printing method, and so adjustments might need to be made. That's called, when I was in commercial printing, we call that pick up and rework. So let's look at something like that. Here, I have a job. It's just a single image, but it can illustrate these ideas pretty well. So I'll drag that job into the system, and it doesn't need to be a booklet, so I'll just use the default sorts of things here. And I'll just get it into the system so we can take a look at it. So I brought a job into the system that we can use to illustrate some of those ideas. And it's just a very simple image. However, it's a simple image that has a few things about it that probably wouldn't pass the sort of critical judgment that people who are running, high quality printing would notice. Like, for example, one of the things is that this suit jacket that this person is wearing, this herringbone fabric, it looks like it's like it's a little bit rough, and like it has the sort of waviness that's typical of a moire pattern. And you can see these sort of secondary interference patterns showing up even on the screen display. Now, just to be perfectly clear, with things like this, you judge them, they're best judged. In fact, you really have to judge them from a printed piece. However, the screen display, this high resolution one, is useful for giving you indicators of what might be trouble. And when you see an indicator of something that might be trouble, then back here in the queue, when the jobs are sitting in the queue, you can highlight the job, and one of the options is called Make a Proof. And so it'll do just a quick one-off print, and then you judge by the print. So you hold the print in one hand, and you're looking at the screen display in the other. And it looks like it's going to show a moire pattern, an interference pattern. So if the printed piece supports your suspicion, and you do see a patterning, then there's a group of settings here called print quality settings in the PrismaSync, and that's where you want to go next. And the one that we're going to look at right now is in the menu option called quality adjustments. It's called moire reduction for images. And you can see that it has different strengths. No handling, normal, strong, stronger. It's little more, most we have. And so why do you have strengths? Because the idea here is you're going to go into the pixel data and you're going to smooth it. That's essentially what you're going to do. But you don't want to over smooth it so that things look, well, what's a good non-technical word? Smudgy or too soft. So you pick what you think is the right strength. I'll just pick strong. And, in real life, you'd hit proof and you'd make another proof. But with this system and with this particular image editing algorithm, you can even see its effects on the screen display. And so you can actually zoom in and look on the screen display, and you can see what it's done, which is really, really handy. Because what happens in real life is your press operators, the first time they interact with these functions, they're not sure how they're going to perform, so you test. And the next time, they'll maybe test again. But by the third time, they know what these tools can do. And that's what that means is a quick glance at the screen display, they already know what's going to happen on the other side. They're familiar. And so their workmanship gets quicker. They get faster. They get more productive. So there's that piece. So now we've fixed a patterning problem. And now I'm looking at the color display, and to my eye, it looks a little bit warm. And when I had the proof in my hand, yes.
I apologize, but that made me think of something. That gives new meaning to the WYSIWYG, because now you really are what you see is what you get. That is really powerful.
Thanks, Bob. I agree. It is WYSIWYG, but it's WYSIWYG within some certain, guidelines. This display is not WYSIWYG for color fidelity, but it is WYSIWYG for certain aspects. When you go in close enough, you can see what the pixels are doing. So it's definitely WYSIWYG that way. And, you know, it's also WYSIWYG in this way, and that is you can see the color separations and how they build up, which is an important kind of WYSIWYG, especially because you always want to see what does the black channel look like versus the three colors. A lot, you know, when you get really good at color printing, a lot can be gleaned from looking at that. And of course, let's not forget, numbers are really useful. Numbers are great. The visual, the WYSIWYG, and the numbers all combined, that's a killer system. So let's look at this color balance issue, for example. To me, it looks too warm. I have the proof. It looks too warm on the piece of paper. And then I look at the recipes here. And for example, one thing that's easy to understand here is, well, when people start with a system like this, its big innovation is that it has the G7 calibration and custom paper profiling built into it. That's what the YouTube video that we looked at together illustrated for us. So what that means is, with a simple operation, for most papers, you can have numbers that show that everything that you're printing is conforming to the most important standards in North America: Grackle printing condition, G7 calibration, and so forth. So in other words, everything that we're doing right now is with the knowledge that I'm printing high quality work. There's nothing wrong with my printing system. So what that means is these edits are really relating to what you've been given in the file data and how you can really add value for your partners and for your clients by looking at their file data and doing the few little adjustments that print files often need in order to do their best performance. That's what we're doing here now. So this one, the color balance is warm, and you can see it because the yellow number is so high. And I know that yellow number is high because I know what will make a neutral gray on a system that's calibrated to G7, and that's too much yellow. Now, the yellow can be in there if a photograph is taken in natural light and the sun's beating down, things will get a yellow glow to them. But this one looks like a studio photograph. That's too much yellow. So what can you do about it? We've looked at curves before, but we looked at them from pulling curves that were already provided in the system, like turning the purple to blue, that cool curve. But this one, I'm pointing at a really useful tool. It's right inside this color picker menu. It's called Add Points. And when you use that tool, this graph appears and it puts anchor points on this graph. This is like Photoshop curves. It puts an anchor point on there, and when you activate the anchor point, you look at the numbers. This is 15% yellow. This says 15% yellow. It's reading what's underneath the cursor. And so at this point, you can make a change by the numbers. You don't even have to be like a big-time visual artist. You can say that yellow's too much. I want to get it closer to what the magenta is. So you can come to the output menu here and just minus it away until it gets down to around 6, which is what the magenta is. And you can see the change is happening on the screen. So in other words, the shifting of the color balance, that's pretty good WYSIWYG. And the beginner would say, okay, I'm done. That's much better. But the expert would say, well, it looks good in that area, but how about in the other areas? You want to check around and see what you've done all over the place. And so if you come up here in the darker areas and you do the same sort of assessment, what does the yellow look like according to the magenta channel? You can see that it appears that too much yellow came out for the dark end of the scale. So you can come here and you can say add another point, and you can see that another anchor point just jumped onto the graph, and you can activate it by just touching on it, and then you can go back up to where that probably should have been, which is around 33, which is where the magenta is. That curve that you made right there, which is easy to make and easy to teach people, that's a professional level color correction. And that color balance issue that was cooked into the file that we received from our customer has now been cooked out again. And so we fixed the moire, we fixed the color balance issue, And it took more time to actually describe it than it would to do it. You know, you can do corrections like that in like a couple of minutes once you understand how to analyze and what tools you have to work with. So the system's really powerful. It can be as simple as you want it to be, but it's really robust. That's, you know, that's a lot of good stuff to work with.
That's cool stuff, Johnny.
Mm-hmm.
I think so too.
All right, Karen and John, again, I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time out to help put this podcast together. I've learned quite a bit. I see the big picture, and I can imagine there's much, much more behind this. And I just want to, again, thank you for the time. Was there anything else, John, that you wanted, the last words you wanted to leave us with? I know this is exciting stuff, but all this needs to be tied together. And how do we tie it all together, John?
Well, thanks, Bob. Yeah, there's when you step back after you see all the individual things that we looked at, it does form a picture, right? But that picture can grow from there. Those are just the little things. The big things here. Let's see if I can review it. So, number one, when you want to run a healthy business, one of the first things that you need is predictability and repeatability. You know, if your business is the manufacturing of printed products, you have to know what you're going to get from day to day. And that's essential for understanding, you know, everything about your costing, your pricing, your efficiencies, all those things. So first and foremost is this system is fantastic at getting you up to color and getting you to conform with a print standard, which is really the best way of knowing that your printing is good. And so we saw today that G7 calibration is built in, and that custom paper profiling is built in, and they both work together. They're really fast. They're easy to operate. So from the start, you know that the quality of your printing, everything that comes through, is top-notch. That means you can predict your repeatability. You can understand your business. So that's number one. Number two is, well, how do my operators get the most out of the equipment? It's like, for example, suppose I have 2 printing presses or 3 printing presses. Over there in the press room, this system has a tool, a monitor called the scheduler. And every time you launch production, the scheduler on the screen display shows you a map of how long it takes for that job to go from click to clunk, and all of the resources in the press that are needed to finish it, how much toner, the paper, and so forth. And so you can launch collections of jobs to each of the printing presses, and the press operators at a glance can look across and say, okay, this job's going to take 15 minutes. I can go over and tend to this one. So the scheduler is a real efficiency tool for the press operator to multitask. Then we've also looked at automated workflows. And you can't really state the importance of those too much, because when you're starting to bring new customers into your environment, each customer and their print work is like a riddle that it's a code you have to crack. You have to see what their work is like. Once you see what their work is like, and you know, if it stays dependable in that way, you build an automated workflow for your customer. So now their jobs come in, and on the way into the system, you apply their workflow to their jobs. Boom, more automation. At each step that you look at the system, it's really laid out very well that way. Repeatability, G7. Accuracy, Grackle color printing. Fast late-stage edits, all the tools that we looked at. The whole thing combines, you know, to a positive business outcome. It's really worth people, you know, if people are interested, if this sounds good, they got to give you a call, Bob. They have to.
Yes. Yes. So, again, thank you, John. Karen, any last words?
Oh, thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate it.